Hey guys, it's Alex Serpentine back again with another video, doing another spiritual profile video, and today is Adolf Hitler, and I'm really excited about this one because he's pretty much the biggest villain in our known history. So, and there's a lot to get into here. I'm going to go through a few different systems. I'm going to do his Myers-Briggs, his Enneagram, his Vedic Astrology, and his Michael Teachings chart. So, if you don't know who Adolf Hitler is, he was leader for Germany in the 1930s, 1940s, started the Second World War, started the Holocaust. If you don't know anything about that, I would recommend watching the Hitler and the Nazis Evil on Trial show on Netflix. It's a mini series. They have a few different episodes. Super interesting, but this stuff is super dark. Like once I get into this, it'll be really interesting because he just has a very particular orientation to everything that made him really fit really well for the role that he actually played. And it's a really dark period in history. So yeah, it's actually really interesting because around the time that Hitler was doing his stuff, we found out about Pluto, the planet Pluto, or the it's not technically a planet anymore, but according to astrology, they call it a planet. And Pluto is like the underworld, basically, the shadow, the dark, rejected part of ourselves, and it's manifesting through Hitler in this example and what happened in Germany and with the Nazis. So it's really interesting to see that he's associated with Pluto archetypally. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But yeah, so this is his spiritual profile. Right here on this first slide, I have the main personality type things that are in the different systems. So he's an INFJ in Myers-Briggs. INFJ-D is actually a subtype that was introduced by Dario Nardi. He has a really good book on that, Decoding Your Personality. There's 4 different subtypes, and so this one for him is the dominant subtype. That's the D. And then I'll go into Enneagram, his instinctual subtype, as well as his tri-type. So I would say he's an 864 sexual subtype. And in Vedic astrology, he has a lot of Aries placements. He has like 4 planets in Aries. And he also has his moon in Sagittarius. And he's a Libra rising. And then I'll go into his Michael Teachings chart. And in his chart, he's a warrior in dominance. He has a priest essence twin. And he's manifesting the baby soul age, even though he's technically in the young soul age. So all very interesting stuff on all these charts and all these different systems. So I'm gonna go into Myers-Briggs first, then Enneagram, then Vedic astrology, and then I'll end it with Michael Teachings. So let's get into it. So if you don't know what an INFJ is, it's one of the idealist temperaments in Myers-Briggs. It's intuitive and feeling. Intuitive is the perceiving function, and feeling is the judging function. So all intuitive feelers are called the idealists. So as a basic summary, I have just some notes on here. It's for INFJ. Typically, they focus on personal growth. They have a talent for foreseeing, and they get flashes of insight. They sustain a vision while honoring the gifts of others. They need a sense of purpose, and they take a creative approach to life. They explore issues to bridge differences and connect people and ideas. and they live an idealistic life, which presents stress and a need to withdraw. So we'll look at the functions right here. So the main functions for INFJ are introverted intuition first. Second, it's extroverted feeling. Third, it's introverted thinking. And fourth, it's extroverted sensing. So it's leading with keen foreseeing is what Dario Nardi calls it, which is focusing on a vision of the future, insights and realizations from the inner hidden world of the unconscious. So basically, introverted intuition is you get a vision of the future. You have very clearly, based on all the information that you're getting in, you have like a very clear picture of, oh, okay, aha, this is what it is. It's like an aha kind of thing. So you just get insights on and instincts on this. It's one of the two intuitive functions, and it's actually the most rare function. And not only that, is it the most rare function to have dominant. The INFJ is actually the most rare Myers-Briggs type. So actually, Jesus was an INFJ also, which is really interesting. So Jesus is representing the archetype of Christ, and Hitler is pretty much embodying the archetype of the Antichrist. But they're both INFJs, which is really interesting. So the second function is the support function, friendly hosting, as Dario Nardi calls it. And they tend to relationships, social norms, and people's needs and values as they organize and make thoughtful decisions. That's what FE is. His third function would be skillful sleuthing, which is introverted thinking. And he would struggle with this function because it's the third place one. So with introverted thinking, you analyze situations, solve problems, and apply leverage according to universal logical principles. And its fourth function is extroverted sensing, active adapting. It's the aspiration function. So it's what they aspire to be able to do. So for him, it would be enjoying the external world, using the five senses, and taking concrete actions based on options before them. So it's really plugged into the present moment, what you're experiencing in your five senses, so you can really engage in the moment with things. But that's his weakest of his four functions. But then there's he has four other functions that are completely in the shadow for him that are not even operative really, that he has any kind of connection to. So these are the main four functions in his function stack: introverted intuition and extroverted feeling. So I'll get into some interesting parts of what Dario Nardi introduces in Decode Your Personality. He introduces that there's actually a yin style and a yang style of each function. So what I found for Adolf Hitler is that he actually has more of the yang style, which is also known as analytic. It's active, focused, fixed, outward, and top down. So this function, the yang version, is called visionary NI. It sticks to a singular vision of the future to improve self and society. It's certain of a few compelling insights and applies complex concepts. It turns realizations into principles, and it acts as a guiding spirit. So that's introverted intuition, yang. And then the second function is called shepherd, for FE, for extroverted feeling. And I identify that he's yang for this as well. And it announces values, prescribes best behaviors, corrals and encourages outliers to join the group, and inspires as an orator. So that's pretty obvious for how Hitler uses FE, how he uses extroverted feeling. Is he's super plugged into what the German people were feeling, because what happened was, they just finished with the First World War and they were just devastated with what happened, and everybody's spirits were low, and they just felt so much resentment and pain and anger, and Hitler basically monopolized on that feeling and could resonate and feel it in all the German people, and felt like that he needed to do something about it. So there's something about that he has this ability to really connect with people's emotions and move them uh, through being an orator. So talking in front of people, and so that's basically what we see for his two functions is he gets insights for the future. He saw this early on that he was for himself. He saw, I'm going to be leading the people, and I'm going to restore Germany, basically. And then he used his FE to connect with his audience and make an impact in that way. So that's his main two functions with the Yang style. So what's also interesting about Dario Nardi's book is he has the different subtypes, which are based on actual brain patterns. There's four different ones. There's the dominant, which is the one that I identified that Hitler has. Then there's also the creative, and there's a normalizing one, and forgetting the fourth one right now. Anyway, you can check out the book. I didn't memorize all of them. But anyway, I think it's supporting, but I can double check that later. But anyway, so the one that was pretty obvious was the dominant subtype for him, which is known as the bold educator. They're the more driven and more confident than the other INFJs. They're outspoken, daring, willing to ruffle feathers. They're eloquent, strong, thoughtful, and deeply attentive to values. They're quick in addressing situations and bringing in fresh ideas. They stay engaged with the world. They take chances. They like having an audience. They're typically advisors or educators, leaders, managers, and teachers. So that's definitely the case for Hitler, being a leader and a teacher. In a sense, he is kind of a teacher in what he presented, which is I'll get into when we get into his Vedic astrology and his Michael teachings. But yeah, so that's the dominant subtype for INFJ. So now I'll get into his Enneagram. The one that I noticed was his most prominent type was the 8, and in particular the sexual 8, which is also known as the 1-to-1 8. And they call this one possession or power. And it has a strong antisocial tendency. They're provocative. They express lust through rebellion. Lots of acting and passion with a detachment from intellect and thinking. So they just get really passionate. They're really engaged with their emotions, but they're not really filtering things through logic or their intellect at all. So it's just like all passion. They're outspoken in their rebellion. They like to be seen as bad. They're proud to oppose convention. So I noticed on the personality database they had Hitler listed as a 461 or 641, something like that, which means that he would have, so instead of 8 it would be 1, but I don't really see that for him because the ones are more about trying to be good and they want to control their anger. But it's very clear that Hitler was really engaging with his anger in a very strong, intense way. And he didn't care about being rebellious, and how he dealt with people as he was rising to power was he was like killing off people and really trying to get as much control and power as he could. So the sexual 8s are fascinating and charismatic. They're seductive, intense, magnetic, and outspoken. So it's really interesting when I was watching the Hitler and the Nazis show. It showed the women were all going crazy for Hitler, like just the sea of women going, oh my god, Hitler! It's crazy what kind of influence he had, and it's that seductive, magnetic power that he had. So one of the things that they really need to become more conscious of is their what's actually happening with their emotions, especially in relating to their vulnerability. So Hitler was not able to be vulnerable at all. Like he had no sense of humor, and he would just be expressing his anger so immediately in response to everything. So it was just really hard to relate to him in any other way than how he was presenting himself. So the sexual 8 really fits for him really well. So now we'll talk about his tri-type. So there's a tri-type theory with the Enneagram, where you basically take one of the types in each of the triads. So there's the body triad, which is 8, 9, and 1. There's the feeling triad, which is the 2, 3, and 4. And there's the thinking triad, which is the 5, 6, and 7. So what I identified for him was that he's a 8, 6, 4. I think 8 is dominant and 6 is second, and then 4 maybe is third, but it could be a different order. But it's interesting to really look at this tri-type theory because it's actually really easy to identify the different themes from each of the triads. So once you learn the different triads and see the difference between each of those types, the 3 types in each triad, you can really figure out how to identify somebody's tri-type really fast. So what they call this one is the truth teller. And what that actually means basically is that they're able to like detect when somebody's like lying or trying to fuck with them in some way. So they're intuitive, which comes from the 4. They're inquisitive, which is from the 6, and they're protective, which is from the 8. Highly sensitive and emotional. They want to be original, that's the 4. Certain, that's the 6, and straightforward is the 8. They can track inconsistencies, call off hidden agendas, deception, and ulterior motives. So that's basically what I was saying. Like, what's really interesting about Hitler is there's many times that people were trying to take him down, and he kept on evading shit all the time. Like, he could just, with his intuition, just tell things so immediately, like that he got out of situations and escaped death so many times. So it makes sense that he's a 4, 6, 8 because all those types together allow for that being really sensitive to those kinds of things. However, the 4, 6, 8 can become tyrannical, and they fail to see how they impact others. They need to learn that their sense of truth may not be the truth. So they feel really strongly that they have a certain truth, but it may not be accurate into what it's actually happening. It can be too personalized and not really more objective about what's actually happening. So they have intense emotions and a sense of urgency, may be viewed as inappropriate and overreactive, which is definitely true in his case. He was reacting to things so intensely all the time. And it was really hard to deal with him. So that's his Myers-Briggs and Enneagram. That's everything I wanted to put in the slides. From here on out, I'm just going to go to his Vedic Astrology and then his Michael teachings, and I have some charts for those. So I like Vedic Astrology because it actually follows where the constellations were at the time of whatever chart you're using. Western is stuck in like 100 AD, so it's not accurate to where everything is now. So you wouldn't be able to see all this information in your Western chart. So that's why I use Vedic. So one of the things that you see that jumps out right away is he has 4 Aries placements. He's got Mercury, Sun, Mars, and Venus in Aries. So some of those are early degree. The Mercury and Sun are 3 degrees for Mercury and 8 degrees for the Sun. That's actually a nakshatra, which is a smaller division of the signs that they use in Vedic astrology, and those are in Ashwini. That's what it's called, and it's basically the symbol of the horse. They're called the cosmic healers, but they have that kind of like charging forward, intense energy that just like blasts through shit. It's kind of like it is very much like Aries. It's a stereotypical Aries, but because they have a lot of vitality and energy, and that's what his sun sign is, as well as his Mercury sign. Excuse me. So he also has Mars and Venus in Aries. Those are both at 24 degrees, which is in a different nakshatra called Bharani, which is still in Aries, obviously, but it's a little bit different. It deals with kind of like bringing in spiritual and occult knowledge and creativity and bringing it into the world in a more objective way, in a more substantial, like grounded way. So a lot of people who have like Bharani are actually in Western, it's calculated to be Taurus. So there's actually some similarities between Bharani and Taurus, because Bharani is ruled by Venus. So actually Venus is in its own nakshatra in his chart. so it deals with death. There's like the god associated with it is the god of death. And there's a lot of people who have Bharani placements that are like graphic designers or do some kind of creative work or something more occult based. And that's really true for Hitler. It's the occult and the kind of like graphic design. Sorry, I got like a scratchy throat right now. So if you think about what he did, creating it, the logo with the what do you call it, swastika, and his whole like creating these videos, these like movies that are supposed to be inspirational and convince people to follow his agenda. It really fits with the Bharani nakshatra pretty strongly. So, and another thing there is that Mars is in Aries in the 7th house. So these are all in the 7th house, but Mars being in Aries in the 7th house is called the Panchamaha Purusha Yoga. It's one of the main yogas in Vedic astrology. And so it basically indicates that he has strong martial talent, like Mars energy, action oriented, leadership kind of energy. So that's really strong in his chart. So these 4 planets, Mercury, Sun, Mars, Venus, being in the 7th house means that 7th house stuff is really big, which is relationships, partnerships, business. And because it's a cardinal or Kendra house, it's one of the main more powerful houses. It's also the 10th house from the 10th house. So it's kind of like the career. It's kind of tied to the career. So this Aries energy is really tied to his career, you can say, in some sense. So another important things in his chart here, he's a Libra rising. So that's more focused on like justice and fairness, and maybe that makes him want to help the German people in some way. It's also a very creative sign as well. And also his moon is in Sagittarius, along with Jupiter, which so it's in his own sign. Jupiter is in Sagittarius, its own sign. And then K2 is in Sagittarius as well. So what that means is he actually has moon and Jupiter conjunct K2, which means that his moon, his mind, and his kind of like philosophical, spiritual guru kind of energy is tied to deep past life experience. Like he's really advanced in those things. So when something's with K2, it signifies you've been working on these things a lot. So he's been using his intuition in his mind and his kind of spiritual guru teacher kind of energy a lot in past lives. And so he's coming into this life to try to finalize that, to find a more mature approach to that, or visit it in a different way. But obviously the way he did it was very destructive, but it's very true and obvious that he played like this teacher role, this kind of like a guru in a sense, having this whole philosophy that he's teaching about. So what that means is those 3 planets, Moon, Jupiter, and K2, are in the 3rd house, and Rahu is always opposite K2. So Rahu's in the 9th house. And because he's a Libra rising, that means that the Rahu is always going to be in the opposite sign as the house. So basically, it's in Rahu's in Gemini, but it's in the ninth house. So that kind of means like he's dealing with the same issues but opposite. So the ninth house is typically aligned with Sagittarius kind of energy. It's the same kind of thing. And the third house is like Gemini because it's the third house, third sign. So what that axis basically means is he's dealing with trying to find a grounded way to communicate with people and reach a lot of different people. But then he's also really aspiring towards a higher philosophy, a uniting overall philosophy or spiritual outlook on things. So that's what Rahu in the ninth house with Gemini basically indicates. So those are some big things in his chart there. Some other things we can look at is because he's a Libra rising, you can look to see where the first house ruler is, which is Venus, and that's in the seventh house. So that means that a big area for him is relationships and partnerships, business partnerships, or different agreements he makes with other people. That's like a big area for him. And then you can also look at the 10th house. In the 10th house, he has Saturn. So Saturn's a big indicator for leadership and discipline. And it being in the 10th house is kind of a natural place for it to be. So it really helps with kind of career and being a leader. So that's pretty obvious for him. So we can look at to see where the 10th house ruler is to see what his career is connected to. So the 10th house, it has Cancer there, and Cancer is ruled by the moon. So the moon is in the third house. So the 10th house is connected to the third house, which means his career is connected to courage and being bold and going for things. That's some of the indications of the third house. But also communication and media and stuff like that. So, and because he has 3 planets there, it's also pretty significant. He has a lot of ties to the third house. So basically, some of the big things for him are the third house and the seventh house as big areas for him. Media, communication, as well as business and partnerships. So that's some of the main stuff in his birth chart. I also want to look at the moon chart real quick. So basically, another way you can look at a Vedic chart, especially when you don't have the precise birth time, you can just make the moon in the ascendant. You just kind of rotate the chart until the moon's in the ascendant, and then you look at the chart from the position, like from the viewpoint of the moon. And in Vedic astrology, they consider the moon to be the most primary planet. So one of the things I wanted to point out to this is he has Rahu in the 7th house from the moon. So it's opposite from the moon. So again, moving towards business and partnerships and stuff like that is really big. But then he also has all his Aries placements are in the 5th house, and 5th house is like past life talent and creativity. So he has this past life talent as like a leader. That's Aries is a very strong leadership energy. So that kind of indicates that he has a lot to pull from past lives, especially as being a leader. So really interesting stuff. He's got some intuitive abilities. With Moon in K2 and Jupiter in K2 as a teacher from past lives, and then he has a strong Aries energy, which is leadership, but also like very strong like warrior, martial kind of energy. And then like last thing I was saying, Rahu in the 9th house is pretty significant for him developing a uniting philosophy in what he's wanting to communicate. So that's his Vedic chart. Really interesting stuff. So now the last thing I'm going to talk about is one of my favorite things, a system called Michael Teachings, which is actually a channeled system. But there's so many different characteristics, like different things, different parts of a Michael chart. So if you look at this key here, there's all these different archetypes, basically the roles: server, priest, artisan, sage, warrior, king, and scholar. and they have all these different characteristics aligned with them for each different role. So you have in each chart you have a different combination of these different things, like a different goal, attitude, mode, center, obstacle, body type, and soul age. So I'm going to go into his chart. So every chart in the Michael teachings is divided into two parts. There's the essence, which is the stuff that stays the same for your whole reincarnational cycle. There's a big part of the Michael teachings that talks about that we go through a reincarnational cycle as part of our lessons and the way that we experience life. That reincarnation is basically, it's just assumed automatically that we have past lives and that we go through a reincarnational cycle and learn lessons, and we develop over several lives, like hundreds of lives sometimes, growing in maturity as we're going through different stages. Kind of like when you're going through school, you have different, you go to elementary school, then you go to middle school, and then you go to high school, and then college. It's kind of like that in terms of the lessons you learn, but also I'll talk about his soul age a little bit, and there's kind of like levels of maturity that happen. But anyway, I'm going to talk about his essence first, which is the stuff that stays the same for his whole cycle. So basically, his role is a warrior, which is the most intense type, and it's very action oriented. It's more independent than the king, which is also an action oriented type. But it's more blunt and kind of rough, and they want them to go and do their own thing. But they're actually more intense than the kings in some ways. So everybody has an essence twin, and his is a priest. So the priest is more of the inspirational axis type. So they want to inspire people towards the higher good, towards what their kind of their spiritual purpose is. What I noticed in the chart, it says it's discarnate, but actually there's a note in the original chart I got that said that his essence twin was actually killed in the gas chambers during the Holocaust in like 1944 or something. So he was, at first, he didn't have as strong of an influence from the priest's energy, but like later on because he basically killed them in the process of the Holocaust. He actually got more priest energy after that. So he's a warrior priest mix, basically. He has a little bit more warrior in his cadence position, which is more of a secondary influence. And then he has some scholar and artisan. The artisan isn't very strong, but the scholar is really good for knowledge and seeking and understanding things and studying things. But basically, he's warrior dominant, and he's got a priest essence twin, which makes him more fit for being a spiritual leader in a sense. So there's something called orientation in your essence, and there's basically it's what domain of things you're focused on mainly, and so it's either truth, love, or energy. So truth is the highest manifestation of the intellect. Love is the highest manifestation of the heart, and energy, or it's also called beauty sometimes, is the highest manifestation of more of a physical side of things, a more grounded, energetic side of things. So because his orientation is energy, that means he's more attracted to war and action-oriented things and being really grounded in his body and very active. So that's really interesting to see that not everybody has that, but it's a really interesting part of his chart. His male-female energy is pretty balanced. It's 47-53. He's pretty much in the middle. His frequency, which is 61, is pretty much in the middle too. So he's not airy or too solid. He's kind of right in the middle, kind of more fluid kind of energy. This is pretty average. His previous cycles is 7. So what a previous cycle is basically we have a whole cycle, which is our reincarnational cycle. We go through our lives, and then once we're done reincarnating, We go to the higher planes to learn the final lessons before we merge with Source again. And then we go to a different planet and then do the whole process all over again, go through the different stages again, reincarnating, and then going to the higher planes. And so he's done that 7 times on 7 planets before he came to Earth, basically. So that's actually a little bit lower than what I've typically seen. So most of the people that I've seen, it's like 10 previous cycles, sometimes like 11 or 12. But the actual average on the planet is like 4. So he's actually ahead of the average. But I haven't come across people like that because it's just the people that are in my life are just not at that level. They're more, they've had more experience through several, like thousands of lives living on different planets and having experience in different forms, different bodies and species on different planets, basically. So it's really interesting to see that he has 7 previous cycles because that's actually kind of lower than what you would typically see. So that means that he's not as advanced as you would think as other people, which is weird. So maybe it's why he's like approaching things in the way he is, because he just hasn't learned these lessons of this, like dealing with the shadow and that kind of stuff. So there's also some stuff you get in your chart if you get a Michael chart that shows your global job and community responsibility, and those stay the same for your whole cycle. So his is health. So basically, the focus is his global job is maintaining the health of the people he's influencing. And so, but what you can kind of see that and how that influences how he was interacting with Germany was he was trying to heal them from their dark, like broken place. Like he wanted to restore them in some way, but he thought about, like, the way he went about it was demonizing his out group, whatever he saw as the out group that wasn't really his part of his part of Germany that he identified with. And I'll get into that in a second. And then his community responsibility is acceleration, which is basically a focus on, like, how do I learn the lessons that I'm learning right now so I can move forward in my evolution. That's basically a big focus for the community responsibility of acceleration. So anyway, the health one is actually a mix of server and artisan energy, and then acceleration is just a straight up artisan, double artisan. So that's just a little more information on that. So that's everything in his essence. That's the stuff that stays the same for his whole cycle on Earth. So now I'm going to get into his overleaves, which are the characteristics that he takes on for just this life as Hitler. So first I'll talk about his soul age. And so the soul age is the natural kind of lessons that we learn in our development. So these are kind of old names that I had for them. So the first soul age is focused on survival. The second one is focused on structure and becoming part of society. And then he was in the young soul age as Hitler, but he actually went back to the baby soul age, which is the structuring focus. And there's a couple more that he hasn't even reached yet, which is the mature soul age, which is about relating, and then the old soul age, which is about teaching or learning about context and understanding everything that you've experienced. So yeah, like I was saying, he's a young soul, but he was manifesting when he was Hitler. He was manifesting as a baby soul, level 2. So it's actually there's 7 levels. So level 2 is one of the earlier ones. So he went back after I've already learned the lessons about the baby soul age, and he went into the young soul age from past lives. But he actually went back for this life to learn lessons about the baby soul age. And so the baby soul age is also called the toddler stage of maturity. And basically you're really sticking to what you feel like is your truth, and you're really identified with your group of people. And then you basically have people who are outsiders or not part of your group, and so you might like even demonize them or like want to get rid of them possibly. So that's, I mean, and also at that stage you're not so aware of some of the the things you're struggling with, which is like the obstacles, which I'll get into in a second. It's really interesting. So yeah, baby soul age is it's an earlier stage of development. So basically, the U.S. right now is in young soul, like level 6, and they're stepping into the mature soul age. So that's more focused on relationships and um, inner emotions and being more introspective. We're not quite there yet. We're still in the young soul age, which is more focused on achievement and appearance and looking good and being successful and kind of the just do it kind of attitude. But the baby soul age is more conservative, kind of typically. Doesn't mean that if you're at the baby soul age that you're conservative. It just means that you're learning some lessons about structure and fitting into society and learning how to do things the right way is one way to look at it. So yeah, I'll get more into that in a second. So another big thing that's really important uh, in your Michael chart is your goal. So there's 7 different goals. So if you look at the key here, it's reevaluation, growth, discrimination, acceptance, submission, dominance, and flow. And Hitler was very clearly in dominance, which is focus on leadership. In its more neutral, like overall sense, it's focused on leadership and making an impact on others, being some kind of authority figure in your field for what you're doing. So it makes a big impact on others when you have the goal of dominance. But each of these characteristics have a negative pole. So if you look at the negative pole for dominance in here, I have this kind of list of all the different characteristics here. Let me find the dominance real quick. Hold on 1 second. Oh yeah. So yeah, it's more like you're a dictator. You impose solutions rather than catalyzing them, and you just totally, you just take over and dominate. You're not sensitive to who you're impacting. It's not necessarily for a win-win when you're in the negative pole. Um, but at the same time, he did. I mean, he was kind of leading people. It's pretty obvious that he was a leader. So that's his goal. Attitude is skeptic, which is on the expression axis, but is kind of more intellectual kind of thing. But basically, there's a tendency to doubt things and be skeptical of things when they come in. So that's kind of his attitude towards things, is to be skeptical. His mode, which is how his energy is, how he uses his energy, is aggression. Both dominance and aggression are these red ones, which means that they're aligned with the king axis kind of energy. Aggression is the most intensely outward moving energy possible for modes. It's the most intense one. So it's just like going after whatever is coming, just like tackling it and going right after it. Very aggressive, obviously. So then there's also something called centers, which are intellectual, emotional, physical, or moving. And you have 2 centers, 2 primary centers. So his main one is emotional. So he's basically experiencing his emotions really strongly. That's what he's relating to primarily first. But then that goes into moving, which is the more action oriented movement kind of energy. So you can see that with his kind of engaging with things and being very active, to have the moving as the secondary one. So now let's get into his obstacles. These are also called dragons, and I have this book that I'm reading called Transforming Your Dragons by Jose Stevens. Really awesome book. It's so good. It gets into each of these obstacles and it teaches you ways to overcome the obstacles. So what's really interesting about Hitler is that he had all three of the exalted obstacles, the ones that are more outward moving and making more impact on the world. There's the more what you call like ordinal obstacles, which don't make as much impact on the world and they kind of make you close down and shrivel up in a way. These ones make you kind of like more strongly making impact on the world. So he has arrogance, greed, and impatience, which is crazy because there's usually people usually have like two, sometimes one, but he had three obstacles. So he had a lot going on. He had a lot of like difficult energy that he was working with. But because he was manifesting as a baby soul, he was at a stage where he wasn't as clearly aware of those what those obstacles were doing and how they were affecting him. They were totally operative, and because he was in the baby soul age, basically there's a tendency to demonize the out group, what he saw as the out group, the people that weren't part of his group. So the Jews, the Gypsies, whoever it is, he 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 demonized them and made them the enemy. And his arrogance basically is to like puffs himself up, makes himself more important than others. The greed is a nonstop desire for more and more power, more influence, more attention, that kind of thing. And then patience is uh, it's associated with a fear of missing out, but it's also trying to rush things and get to the next moment. And there's a deep inability to be present in the present moment and relax in the present moment. So you're just always trying to get to the next place. Like you could be very goal oriented, but you're always like pushing to make things happen. And you're just impatient, which is really hard to deal with. So these are really hard. Like these three obstacles are really intense together, and they're the exalted ones. So it's pretty intense. I haven't seen this before with these three obstacles. I haven't seen anybody with three obstacles. So yeah, it's crazy. So now we'll talk about the body types. So the body types are different energies. Basically, they're in your bodies. Each body type has a different energy to them. So the mercurial is uh, really made for communication. Um, it's aligned with like planet Mercury, which is all about communication and intellect and that kind of thing. So it makes him a good speaker, basically, and that's his main body type. Then he has lunar, which is like the moon, which is more emotional and intuitive, and they say it's often genius kind of energy. So he has that too, and then he has a third type with a body type, Plutonian, and I heard it was like 3% plutonian, so it's just a little bit, but that's actually a lot. Like I haven't seen anybody with plutonian before. So you know how I was saying at the beginning of the video that Pluto was like a big influence, like it was discovered around the time that he was like born and this stuff started happening with the Holocaust and all that. He actually had energy from Pluto as his body type, and what that basically means is like you're gonna have a big, like massive scale influence on others, but also if, in the negative pole, it has a tendency to, I mean, it can make such a big impact, but it can make a, a negative impact that goes on for generations, like a huge impact on a grand scale. So it's pretty scary to see that he has the plutonian and he was more in the negative pole of it. So it's really interesting to see that because I've never seen that before. So really interesting body type combination there. So his quadrant, which is basically you have different kind of roles you play in group settings. What kind of energy you usually take up and what role you play. And he takes power, so he's the one that takes charge in any situation. He's the one that's like, okay, we're gonna go do this thing, and let's go do this, and that's basically his quadrant, is power. And then everybody has different needs. They have three needs, three primary needs. His is freedom, exchange, and communion. freedom is just being able to do what you want, and then exchange is having one-on-one connections with people and communicating back and forth and having any kind of exchange. It could be like physical touch, it could be through conversation or giving things, or but it's like a back and forth, kind of like an equal kind of thing, which is a need to bond with people one-on-one, basically. And then communion is his last need, which is he wants to be part of a community and have some kind of connection to greater society, to his community. So that's all his needs. So that's all his stuff in his Michael chart. So what you can see is he has a lot of this like action oriented axis stuff, like being a warrior and having secondary warrior energy orientation. He's a young soul, but he's manifesting baby. Then he's dominance, goal, aggression mode, moving centered, impatience, and then he has all the exalted uh, obstacles, which is pretty intense, especially at the baby soul age, where they just want to demonize the out group and take control, and they're just so unconscious of these patterns operating. Skeptic. He's emotionally centered mainly, mercurial. So yeah, really interesting stuff. Um, it's just crazy to see his chart and see that he was basically destined to be a leader, but he was embodying so much darkness and shadow stuff, and he wasn't even aware of his shadow because he was projecting it onto the out group, what he saw as his out group. So it's just really dark shit. So yeah, that's everything from the different systems. We went over Myers-Briggs, which he's an INFJ dominant subtype. We talked about his Enneagram. He's an 864 sexual. His Vedic astrology chart, he had a lot of Aries placements, Moon in Sagittarius, Rahu in the 9th house in Gemini. And then in his Michael chart, he's a warrior and dominance in the baby soul age. So it's really, really interesting to do this study of him and see how he fits in all these different systems. He was very clearly supposed to make a big impact and has a lot of action-oriented energy, leadership energy, spiritual leader energy, and having his own philosophy. But he was embodying the shadow. He was embodying basically the Pluto archetype, which is the shadow. So it was a really dark part of our history, but it's like when we discovered Pluto, it was us becoming aware of our shadow, and it's really important that we actually embrace the shadow. I was reading a little bit about Carl Jung's book, The Aeon, and he talks about how we don't we look at the archetypes. He was looking at the archetypes of Christ and the Antichrist, and basically the argument he was making was we're not only supposed to embody the light, which is representative through Christ, but also the Antichrist. Not saying that you want to be like Hitler and be projecting your shadow onto everybody else and not owning the shadow for yourself, but there is some really dark stuff about Hitler, like actually being proud of having an ice cold heart, and he had this fascination with wolves, like the symbology and of wolves and what they represent, and kind of this vicious energy, and he was just so engaged in that. But he wasn't aware, he was like unconscious of all these patterns that he was playing out, especially because he's at this more like earlier soul age, and also he didn't have so many previous cycles. But he was clearly had experience being a leader and a spiritual leader from past lives, and he came into that life as Hitler to play this role as this basically an Antichrist archetype kind of character. So yeah, that's basically everything I wanted to say about Hitler. It's about an hour-long video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm gonna do some more videos like this with different spiritual profiles for different celebrities and stuff. but I wanted to do this one for a while, so I'm happy I got around to it. The next videos I'm going to start doing is I'm going to do a series on the dragons, the transforming your dragons, the obstacles from Michael Teachings. So this book, I really recommend you guys check this out because we all have obstacles. We each have we usually have 2 obstacles. So if you read through this book and identify what your obstacles are, it's going to help you so much to identify them, because then you can actually work on them and overcome them. So I'm going to do that series pretty soon here, talking about each of the obstacles and how to overcome these different obstacles. So thanks again so much for coming and listening to this. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in a future video.